Picture a wooden ship, longer than a football field, groaning through black, restless waves in the dead of night. Below deck, it's packed tight. Sacks of rice, jars of grain, royal cargo, weapons, supplies, stacked all the way up. No refrigeration, no steel containers, no safety systems. One bad wave, and everything shifts. That cargo becomes a moving wall of weight, strong enough to crush the ship from the inside. And yet, ancient Korean treasure ships sailed for months through rough seas without falling apart, without their supplies turning into chaos. So how did they manage it? The answer is surprisingly simple and quietly brilliant. Before we even get into stacking techniques, we need to understand the real problem. Because at sea, cargo isn't passive, it's dangerous. The moment it shifts, the balance of the ship shifts with it. A slight roll can become a deep lean. And if it goes too far, the ship doesn't come back. Ancient Korean fleets weren't sailing empty waters. They moved through coastal routes, narrow straits, and long open stretches, carrying everything they needed to survive and operate. Rice, grains, dried fish, fermented food, alongside arrows, armor, weapons, and valuable trade goods like ceramics, cloth, and metals, sometimes even live animals, so the challenge wasn't small. How do you load all of that into a wooden vessel, endure weeks, sometimes months, of rough seas and still arrive intact? The answer wasn't simply tying things down. It was something smarter, designing the ship and the cargo system together. So the load didn't fight the ship, it became part of its strength. The first shift in thinking was simple, but powerful. A ship's hold is not an empty cave, it's a system. Korean shipbuilders treated that space with intention. They broke it into sections and layers, almost like shelves inside a cupboard. Instead of dumping cargo into one open hold, they worked with the ship's structure, using beams, ribs, and low partitions as natural boundaries. Then came the stacking. Heavy items sat low, anchoring the ship. Lighter goods were layered above. Every gap was filled. Bags, baskets, jars, anything that could stop movement. Nothing was left loose. So when the ship leaned with the waves, the cargo didn't surge. It pressed into itself, held in place by both the packing and the hull. In a storm, the crew wasn't constantly battling shifting weight. The ship, and the way it was packed, did that work for them. The second idea was just as important. Treat cargo as controlled ballast. Every ship needs weight low down to stay upright, and Korean crews understood something critical. Where that weight sits matters just as much as how much of it you carry. So they placed the heaviest cargo, jars of grain, dense ceramics, metal goods, deep in the bottom of the hull. The center line of the ship became the most stable zone, packed with dense, low-movement loads. And just as importantly, they avoided stacking heavy weight high or unevenly to one side, which could throw the entire vessel off balance. What could have been a dangerous burden became an advantage. Because now, when waves hit, the ship could rock, but it stayed grounded. Its center of gravity remained low, steady, controlled. The cargo wasn't fighting the ship anymore. It was helping hold it together. If you want something to move, you give it space. If you want it to stay still, you take that space away. Korean sailors understood this instinctively, long before modern shipping containers existed. So they packed cargo tight, deliberately tight. Sacks pressed into barrels, barrels locked against beams, beams reinforced by the curve of the hull itself. Every gap was treated as a risk. If something could slide, it would. So they filled those spaces with smaller items, woven mats, or spare supplies. Softer materials like textiles, ropes, and folded sails were wedged between heavier objects, absorbing shock and reducing impact. It was like building a three-dimensional puzzle. Every piece supported another. Nothing had room to gain momentum. And that was the key, because once cargo can't move freely, it can't turn into force. What looks like simple packing was actually protection for the cargo, the crew, and the ship holding it all together. A smart system only works if the people using it understand it, and Korean sailors did. They didn't just load cargo and hope for the best. They followed clear, repeated patterns. Certain goods always went in the same parts of the ship. Heavier, stable cargo had its place below, while lighter, everyday supplies stayed closer to the top and near access points, so they could be reached without dismantling everything. But the real strength was consistency. They rebuilt the same layout again and again, voyage after voyage. Over time, this became an unwritten system, almost instinctive. You didn't just know what to load. You knew exactly where it belonged and how it should sit. That reduced guesswork. It reduced mistakes. And in rough seas, that familiarity mattered. Because every crew member could feel when something was off and knew exactly where to fix it before it became a problem. Food on these ships wasn't just dead weight sitting in the dark. It was part of a system. Korean sailors chose supplies that could survive time, movement, and pressure. Dried grains, salted fish, fermented foods. These weren't just durable. They were predictable. They didn't spoil easily, and they didn't suddenly change in weight or structure. Then came the containers. Clay jars, wooden boxes, tightly woven baskets, strong enough to stack, stable enough to hold their shape even under pressure. And just as important was access. Food that needed to be used first was placed where it could be reached easily, without tearing apart the entire arrangement. That meant fewer disruptions, less shifting, less risk, because every time you reorganize cargo at sea, you introduce instability. So this wasn't just about feeding the crew. It was about preserving the structure of the ship itself, all the way through the journey. When you bring all of these ideas together, something powerful emerges. Ancient Korean treasure ships weren't just wooden hulls filled with cargo. They were carefully organized systems, almost like engineered machines, where every jar, every sack, every crate had a purpose. The layered holds turned empty space into structured storage. The heavy-low approach gave the ship a steady, grounded core. Tight packing removed movement, so nothing could build dangerous momentum. Repeated patterns gave the crew confidence and consistency. And the food system kept supplies usable without constantly disturbing the balance. Each piece worked with the others. And that's the real insight. They didn't just store cargo, they controlled it. By stacking with precision and intention, they turned potential chaos into stability, protecting both their supplies and the ship itself through long, unforgiving journeys. We often picture ancient ships as fragile, small wooden bodies at the mercy of a restless sea. But Korean treasure ships tell a very different story. They didn't rely on steel containers or modern refrigeration. What they had was something quieter, but just as powerful. Careful design, sharp observation, and knowledge refined over generations. Because in the end, it wasn't just the strength of the wood that kept those ships alive. It was the invisible order inside the hull. The way every sack was placed, every jar secured, every gap removed. The way cargo wasn't just stored, but understood, controlled, and made part of the system. And that's the deeper truth about survival at sea. It rarely comes from one dramatic invention. It comes from hundreds of small, deliberate decisions, working together to hold chaos in place, even as the waves try to tear everything apart.